Well, no and no to both questions, sadly. This most recent report from the Environment Agency that came out a couple of weeks ago shows about 3.6 million hours of pollution across England and Wales. And often, let's not forget, these are dry spills. This is when it's not raining and therefore illegal discharges. When it comes to the lack of investment.
That's right. Millions of hours of illegal sewage dumping, and they've gotten away with it for years. Now, for the first time, water company bosses might face prison, but only if they cover it up. The public is fuming, the facts are damning, and yet, we've barely scratched the surface of this scandal. Welcome back to the channel where we cut through spin, expose the lies, and bring you the truth. Today we dive into the UK's sewage crisis and the water company bosses who are finally being threatened with jail. Make sure to hit subscribe so you never miss a takedown like this. So what triggered this storm? Today marks a turning point. Under new laws, water company executives could face up to 2 years in prison, but only if they're caught covering up illegal sewage spills. As reported,
big story of the day, water company bosses will face up to 2 years in prison under new laws coming into force today. That's if they cover up illegal sewage spills.
Well, the Environment Department...
Let that sink in. Not for polluting rivers, not for poisoning ecosystems, not for wrecking public health, just for hiding it. James Wallace, chief executive of River Action, didn't mince his words when asked if this was really a win.
Held to account.
Well, it would seem to be good news, but I think, as you've already pointed out, it's only if they withhold evidence. And to me, I think the greater crime of pollution is the one that they should be punished for. So if there's repeated...
Wallace isn't wrong, because what's happening across England and Wales is nothing short of environmental vandalism. Now let's look at the excuses, and they're paper thin. Wallace revealed the scale of the disaster with brutal clarity.
This most recent report from the Environment Agency that came out a couple of weeks ago shows about 3.6 million hours of pollution across England and Wales. And often, let's not forget, these are dry spills. This is when it's not raining and therefore illegal.
And what have water companies done to fix it?
Well, no and no to both questions, sadly. This most recent report from the Environment Agency that came out a couple of weeks ago shows about 3.6 million hours of pollution across England and Wales. And often, let's not forget, these are dry spills. This is when it's not raining and therefore illegal discharges. When it comes to the lack of investment, we've also seen during this period of privatisation £64 billion worth of debt accrued by water companies, which they've effectively sold off the assets or leveraged their assets so that they can then give dividends and interest payments to their investors, rather than investing in the problem. So that is why...
Let that land. These companies racked up £64 billion in debt just to line shareholder pockets, while sewage kept pouring into our rivers. But they still have the audacity to act like victims, blaming exceptional rainfall or infrastructure limits.
Have no other option.
Well, the term is exceptional circumstances. If it is exceptional, in other words, stormwater, very, very heavy, hard to predict rainfall, then yes, they are allowed to do that. But that is not most of the time. Whereas if you look at the statistics that you've mentioned already, then this is the case where you have dry spilling. A dry spill is when there's no rainfall at all, but they're still discharging. And unfortunately, that happens all over the country all the time. It's not just Thames Water, it's all water companies everywhere.
Yeah. Southern Water included, down where I...
So what does this mean for everyday people? Let's not forget, we're paying more for our water than most of Europe. And in return, we get some of the lowest quality.
But at all, by any means, we pay generally more for our water and sewage treatment services as a nation than we see across Europe. And we also see water quality generally much lower. There are some exceptions in remote places where you've got a very high population, a lack of investment. But if you look across Europe as a whole, I'm afraid Britain is bottom of the pile. However, there are better ways.
This isn't accidental. It's by design. The system is rigged. Wallace didn't hold back.
Privatisation, £64 billion worth of debt accrued by water companies, which they've effectively sold off the assets or leveraged their assets so that they can then give dividends and interest payments to their investors, rather than investing in the problem. So that is why we're seeing this issue. And then let's not forget the lack of regulation. During the past 15 years, we've seen very significant cuts in the Environment Agency's budget by about 70%. So yes, there's more monitoring, but there's not legal enforcement. So bring it back to the story.
This is a perfect storm. Underfunded regulators, over-leveraged companies, and a government that looked the other way for 15 years. But Wallace goes even further, exposing the glacial pace of justice.
Here, we see, for example, an organisation like Thames Water who have knowingly committed a crime by killing fish in the River Mole in 2017. It took 6 years for prosecution because of things like court time. So that's another issue here to consider. They had to wait 5 years to go to court.
James, how do we fare compared to the rest of Europe?
So yes, bosses might go to jail if they cover it up, but what about the actual pollution, the ecological destruction, the public betrayal still waiting? Here's where it all starts to unravel, because it's not just a few bad apples. The entire water industry structure in Britain is broken by design. James Wallace didn't hold back about how privatization warped priorities.
Governing water companies, and this is a really critical point. If you're always chasing profit and not thinking about investing in your infrastructure, then not surprisingly, you're going to see a decrease in water quality.
That right there is the bombshell. It's not just that companies were reckless. The system was set up to prioritize profits over clean water. And compare this to Europe, we're being ripped off.
Water quality. What we see in Europe are structures where you can have public benefit and environmental outcomes prioritized over profit. And basically that means you have, rather than a privatized...
He laid out a real alternative, something the UK could have done but didn't.
You have, rather than a privatized system, you have one that is, let's think of it as blended. You have not-for-profit, you have municipal oversight and so on. So it means that, yes, where investment's brought in, it makes a fair return. Excuse me. But also, that investment needs to come from benign sources, not just private, and it needs to come from public sources. It needs to come on terms that are looking at water quality and the benefits to customers instead.
It's possible, it's proven, and it's working elsewhere. But here in the UK, we let water monopolies pile up billions in debt, not to fix pipes, not to stop spills, but to pay dividends.
By water companies, which they've effectively sold off the assets or leveraged their assets so that they can then give dividends and interest payments to their investors, rather than investing in the problem. So that is why we're seeing this issue. And then let's not forget,
this wasn't a mistake. It was deliberate policy. And now they want credit for new laws that punish cover-ups, but still don't jail anyone for actually dumping sewage. Even the Environment Secretary had to admit the public's had enough.
Of Bury St Edmunds, people are really angry that rivers like this up and down the country have had record levels of pollution and sewage dumped into them. And that happened because regulation and enforcement was so weak and toothless under the previous government.
Weak and toothless? That's putting it lightly. This isn't just a few rogue companies. It's a nationwide scandal. Water companies knowingly committed environmental crimes. Regulators got defunded. Executives walked away rich. And the public was left with poisoned rivers and bloated bills. Even when Thames Water killed fish in the River Mole in 2017, Wallace says,
it took 6 years for prosecution because of things like court time. So that's another issue here to consider. They had to wait 5 years to go to court.
James, how do we fare compared to the rest of Europe?
This is what failure looks like. And while Europe cleaned up its act, the UK kept swimming in sewage.
A lack of investment. But if you look across Europe as a whole, I'm afraid Britain is bottom of the pile. However, there are...
Add to that 3.6 million hours of sewage spills, dry weather discharges, i.e. illegal, and not a single water executive jailed since privatization. Now you tell us, who's really protecting Britain's waterways? Britain deserves clean water, real accountability, not more spin and powerful deterrents that don't punish actual polluters. So if you're angry too, if you're done being lied to, hit that subscribe button now. We're not stopping here. More breakdowns, more truth, and more takedowns. Every week, because someone's gotta say it.